is Rachel Prosser, and I am here to ask the question that many moms, just like myself, have asked themselves over and over again. Should I allow my children to play violent video games? Will these types of video games contribute to my children having violent behavior towards their peers? If my kids do display violent behavior, how do I know it's because I have allowed them to play violent video games? Now I'm going to discuss some items that will make the decision easier for you as a parent. Should I let my child play violent video games or not? Many think violent video games do contribute to youth violence. In 2008, there was a study done that showed that 97% of children ages 12 to 17 played video games on a regular basis. In fact, 10 out of 20 of the best-selling video games in the U.S. during 2008 contained violence. Video games that are violent in nature have been blamed in the media for things like school shootings, like we saw at Columbine, violence towards women, and increases in bullying in school and in the play yard. Many blamed Columbine shooting on the premise that the shooter was obsessed with playing violent video games, just like Halo. Critics argue that violence that is displayed in these types of violent video games desensitize children to the real effects of violence by rewarding players when stimulating violence during the game. These same critics argue that rewards given in video games for stimulating violence, give children and youth the explanation that violence is the right way to deal with conflict instead of turning to other forms of conflict resolution. A study performed in 2009 found that children and adolescents who play violent video games have a stronger belief in violent strategies and are also less forgiving than players of video games that are nonviolent, such as Just Dance. Also, it has been shown that violent video games tend to create feelings of joy, happiness, and excitement when the child has the ability to cause pain in others during the game or on the play yard. This seems to stem from a link to lower feelings of empathy in players versus children that do not play violent video games. Empathy is the ability that we have to enter into another person's feelings. Empathy is believed to lower the level of aggressive behavior in people because we're able to relate and understand to how someone may be feeling. Therefore, we do not want to cause violence and we don't want to act on our aggressive thoughts. Aggressive behavior scripts can also develop from playing violent video games. Let me explain. A behavioral script occurs when there is a repetition of action that affects the subconscious mind. It is thought that playing violent video games advise youth to develop behavior scripts that encourage them to act on aggressive behaviors in specific situations. Now, violent video games do not cause violence in today's youth, critics would argue, because crime in America has been declining as the exposure to and use of violent video games has risen. Between 1995 and 2008, the arrest rate for juvenile crime has fallen 49.3%, during which the sales of violent video games has quadrupled. Also, there are so many holes in the studies that create violent crime with the use of violent video games. Some of these holes are the length of subjects followed. So, for example, there could be a child who's followed for a short amount of time, and we need to follow that same subject for a long amount of time, a long period of time, to really understand the correlation between violence in video games and the contribution to violent behavior. Due to study techniques, thoughts about aggression have been confused with true aggressive behaviors. By using loud sound blasts during these studies to stimulate violence, during these studies, aggressive thoughts have occurred in the children they're studying, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they will act on these aggressive thoughts and turn them into violent behaviors. You can see how that could occur. They could associate the loud sounds with violent thoughts, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to go out and act on those thoughts. With all of the holes in the different studies, a link that violent video games cause violent behaviors has not been proven. Another thought is that children who are already violent in nature are drawn to these types of violent video games in the first place, not that the violent video game is the causing of the behavior. Some also state that children who play violent video games may have a lesser sense of violence because the video games served as a substitution for them having to act on these violent thoughts that they may have. They are able to pretend while they're playing these violent video games that they are releasing their aggressive thoughts onto actual humans instead of actually releasing them and performing violent acts on their peers or on other adults, for example, maybe their parents. Other predispositions, such as exposure to family violence, say mom and dad are fighting all the time, and aggressive personalities have also been shown to hold heavy weight on whether or not the child exhibits violent behaviors. Violent video games, many suggest that violent behaviors are associated with them, but there is no proof that these games cause the behavior. Youth may copy the violent actions that they see exhibited during the violent video games, but that doesn't mean that they weren't going to participate in these violent actions. So what I'm trying to say is that they could see a man being shot, for example, in Grand Theft Auto for stealing a car, and they are pretending, and they may go copy this in a play-like situation when they're playing with their friends. It does not mean that they will go out, find a gun, and find a way to shoot another person just because they've seen that in those video games. So, in conclusion, we've reviewed both sides. We reviewed what critics think. Does violent video games contribute to violent youth behavior, or does it not? There are several things to consider as a mom when choosing whether or not we should allow our children to be exposed to violent video games. One thing we should place much importance on are video game ratings. Let me tell you some of the ratings just so that you're aware of them. There are early childhood, which is suitable for all ages. There is everyone ages 10 plus, which is what it says, suitable for children ages 10 and older. There's a rating that is teen, which is suitable for children and youth ages 13 and older. There is a mature rating, which is suitable for ages 17 and over. And then there is also an adult-only rating, which is suitable for all people over the age of 18. Parents cannot rely on society to provide an explanation as to whether or not violent video games cause violent behaviors in today's youth. We need to pay very close attention to our youth and monitor what they are exposed to. After monitoring what they are exposed to, we then need to see how they are reacting. What kind of behaviors are they showing, and what kind of behaviors are they exhibiting in comparison to what they have been exposed to. It is up to us as parents, teachers, and guardians as to what we should allow each individual child to partake in when speaking in regards to video games. What may strongly affect one child could not even register with another child. It just depends on the individual. Violent behavior should be dealt with on an individual basis with rewards and consequences as the parents see fit. So, question, what do I recommend you do? Do these violent video games contribute to youth violence, or do they not? There is no black and white answer here. If your child tends to exhibit violent behavior after they've been exposed to violent video games, it is your decision as the parent. Should I pull these away from them, or should I allow them to continue playing these types of violent video games? Whether or not the violent video games cause violent behavior should not impact specific parenting styles or be there to take the blame for your child's violent behavior. We need to pay close attention to what your child is being exposed to and how they are responding to these environmental factors in their lives. If you feel as if violent video games are causing your child to exhibit more violent behaviors, then do away with these video games. Make this call as the parent and not society's call as to whether or not violent video games cause violent behavior. Thanks for your time, and thanks for listening to both sides of the argument in regards to, do violent video games contribute to youth violence in today's society? I appreciate your time. Thanks.